When I asked where my daughter was buried, he said, "You don't need to know." I didn't cry. I just stood there, coat zipped to my chin, the Vermont wind slicing past my cheeks like thin razors. Wesley didn't even open the door all the way. He stood in the gap, one foot against the frame, as if I might barge in, as if a grieving mother was a threat to his curated life. She didn't want a public service, he added, eyes flicking toward the interior, the soft glow of pendant lights over a sterile marble kitchen. It was private. I stared at the leaf stuck to his pant leg, yellow, soggy, trembling in the wind. You buried her. Without me? He inhaled sharply, a half sigh, half scoff. She wanted peace, not drama. There was no room for me in that sentence. Not even as a subject to be rejected, just absence, like I had died before she did. I looked down at the small tin of lemon cookies I had baked that morning. My hands tightened around it. You could have called? I sent a message. A text. 4 words. She's gone. It's done. He blinked. Slow, like I was the one being unreasonable. Behind him, I saw a blur of a child dart past, my granddaughter Leela. Her curls bounced like Marissa's used to. She didn't look my way. Someone called her name? Not me. I just want to know where she is. He shook his head. It's better this way. She didn't want you involved. My voice cracked. She would never say that. Wesley didn't reply. The wind blew harder. The porch flag snapped. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, then silence again. I turned and walked back down the stone steps, past the hedges I used to trim on summer visits. My knees hurt. Each step felt like it might buckle. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me in. He didn't hand me a location or an apology or a reason. Only erasure. That night I stood at the kitchen table, the cookie tin unopened, a teacup trembling in my hand. She was gone, not just from the world, from me, and I had no place to grieve, no grave to sit beside, no proof that she had even belonged to me. I opened my drawer of old letters. Postcards from Marissa in college, Mother's Day cards with stick figure flowers, the list she made at age 10, top 5 things I love about my mom. Way 3, you always listen? I gripped that one until the paper bent. What happened to us? What had he told her? I hadn't seen her in months. Every time I asked to visit, Wesley said she needed rest, time, space, recovery. All the lies sound gentle when they're dressed up in concern. I opened my laptop. Type, how to locate a grave without next of kin access. I didn't sleep that night. The tea went cold. At 3:14 a.m., I dug through the closet and found the last envelope she had mailed me 8 months ago. It smelled like lavender and ink. There was a photo inside, her and Leela in the park. Marissa looked thin, yes, but she was smiling. There was no letter, just the photo. And suddenly I wondered, had she sent more? Had Wesley hidden them? I walked barefoot across the cold floor to the old wooden box in the attic, where I kept every card, every photo, every note she had ever sent. But nothing from this year, no handwriting, no stamp dated past March. She had reached out. I knew it. The silence wasn't hers. It was placed there, like a wall. And I was done sitting outside it. I folded the cookie tin closed, unopened. Then I opened my address book. There were people who owed me answers, and I wasn't afraid of asking anymore. The library still smelled like old paper and lemon wax. I used to take Marissa there every Thursday. She was 5 the first time, too small to reach the bottom shelf but determined to carry all 6 picture books herself. You read? I turned the pages, she'd say, clutching them to her chest like gold. We had a routine. 1 cinnamon scone from the bakery on Elm, a lap around the duck pond, then 2 quiet hours in the children's corner, her tucked under my cardigan like a second heart. That fall, we read The 100 Dresses. I remember her frowning when I finished it. Why didn't the girl say something sooner? She asked. It's worse to be quiet. I had no answer then. Now, the silence roared. I still had her drawings, a crayon rainbow with the label use, scrawled underneath, a princess and a queen, both with matching brown hair and glasses. You're the boss queen, she told me once, giggling as she stuck the paper crown on my head. When she was 12, I let her paint her bedroom navy blue, all 4 walls. It's too dark, my neighbor had said, but Marissa needed her own sky, and I gave it to her. Even when she moved across the country, we sent books back and forth, notes in the margins, jokes, poems, a silent thread that stitched across miles. Then Wesley happened. He didn't like fiction, not productive, he once said. She laughed it off at first, but slowly, the boxes stopped coming. No more bookmarks tucked with tea bags. No more calls to ask, remember that Emily Dickinson line. I told myself she was busy, marriage, work, motherhood. I told myself love didn't always need words. But that was a lie. And she had taught me better. It's worse to be quiet. I ran my fingers across the spine of our last shared book, a collection of Neruda poems. Her favorite was marked with a ribbon. Love is so short, forgetting is so long. I stood there in the middle of that small, silent room and let the memory wash over me. The laughter, the paint-stained shirts, the way she used to call me Uni when she wanted something. And I knew in that moment, I had not lost my daughter in one day. I had been losing her for years, but I wasn't done fighting to find her. The Neruda book trembled slightly in my hands, not from weight, just from time. Its cover had dulled, corners curled like old leaves. The ribbon marker still smelled faintly of bergamot, the kind she used to steep when writing papers in college. That scent lingered like a ghost in the quiet. But the silence was different now, not the hush of a shared moment, but the vacancy of absence. I placed the book gently on the shelf. My fingers hovered, not quite ready to let go. Then I noticed it. Our shelf, the one we'd built together on her 8th birthday, was missing a row. One whole row of books gone. I blinked, looked again. No Austen, no Alcott, no Baldwin. Just a space, empty. Like something had been quietly erased. Had Wesley boxed them up? Had she? I wasn't sure what hurt more. Back then, she used to bring me wildflowers, sun-bleached dandelions, lavender from the neighbor's edge. She'd press them into napkins and say, "This one's for your smile." Lately, she offered coupons. "Mom, you should try this new serum. Your skin's a bit tired, maybe fewer carbs. For energy, I mean," she said it lightly, always lightly. But it scraped like sandpaper, and Wesley, he rarely spoke directly to me. "Only around me? She forgets things. She means well, but nothing," I muttered now, fingers curling. I wasn't brittle. Not yet. A week ago, I had offered to take Caleb to the planetarium. He loved stars, just like Marissa once did. She smiled too quickly. "Oh, Wesley's parents already planned something. Maybe next month?" Next month never came. My voice had become background noise. The house, once filled with Sunday pancake mornings and sock puppet shows, now echoed only with their voices. Filtered through closed doors and muffled through baby monitors, I was no longer asked to check. Once, I had tucked a note into Marissa's coat pocket. "If you ever feel small, remember, you came from a woman who shook mountains." She never mentioned it. Maybe she never found it, or maybe she didn't want to. I stood there in the living room, lights dimmed, the air still holding the faint tang of lemon polish. And for the first time in months, I said it out loud, "She's slipping away," not because of miles or schedules, but because I no longer fit the narrative they'd built. I was the soft chapter being edited out, but I still held the pen, and I wasn't ready to close the book. The kitchen was warm with Sunday light and cinnamon. I had just finished scrambling eggs when Wesley walked in, phone in one hand, protein shake in the other. "Caleb wants pancakes," he said flatly, not looking up. "They're on the griddle," I replied, flipping one. "He likes the edges crispy," he grunted. "That's too much sugar for breakfast," I smiled gently. "It's Sunday. A little joy won't kill him." Marissa stepped in, still tying her robe. Her hair was damp, cheeks flushed from a quick shower. She looked at me, then away. No smile. Wesley set his phone down, eyes still on the screen. "We're trying to cut down on carbs." "You know, for his attention span," I nodded, swallowing the rest of my reply. I wasn't here to argue, just to help, just to love. I placed Caleb's plate gently on the table, adding 2 orange slices shaped like moons. He beamed, hopping onto his chair. "Grandma makes stars with eggs?" he giggled. "I did. I used to, before everything became measured." Wesley took one look and sighed. "Honestly, it's like you're trying to parent from the 1980s. My hands paused mid-air. Marissa poured her coffee. I turned, offering a soft laugh. Old habits, I suppose. But he wasn't done. "You mean outdated ones? We're raising him with science, Eunice, not nostalgia." His voice wasn't sharp, but it sliced. I looked to Marissa. She stirred her cup, eyes lowered. The moment stretched. I tucked the spatula into the sink, rinsed my hands slowly. No one spoke, the eggs burned. Later, as I gathered my bag, I heard them whispering in the hallway. "She means well?" Marissa said quietly. Wesley's reply was crisp. "She's not the mother you remember. She's just here. Just here." I stood frozen, one glove half on, my breath caught between disbelief and knowing. I had become furniture. The soft chair in the corner, the lamp that flickered sometimes but still worked. Useful until it wasn't. I left without saying goodbye. No one noticed. The leaves were just beginning to turn. Caleb kicked through piles of red and gold, chasing wind with his jacket flapping like wings. I walked behind him, slow, steady. One hand curled around the leash of their skittish golden retriever. The sun peeked through maples, casting dappled light across the sidewalk. This was our ritual, one I had carved from what little remained. "Look, Grandma!" Caleb pointed at a squirrel scaling a low fence. "He's doing Parker." I laughed, soft but full. Maybe he's training for the Olympics. We circled back toward the house, the dog tugging gently toward familiar smells. Marissa stood on the porch, arms crossed, one hip angled against the railing. Her phone glowed in her palm, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at me. "Next time, let us know if you're taking him out," she said, voice light too light. Wesley thought someone snatched him. I blinked. We just walked down to Fairview and back. "Like always," she shrugged, eyes unreadable. "It's just helpful to keep routines consistent. Helpful." I held back the words rising in my throat. "So was I once." I unclipped the leash, handed it to her. Caleb ran inside, oblivious. Marissa didn't move. There was a pause, small but heavy. "You know," she added, "who doesn't need stories before bed anymore. Wesley plays those audiobooks. They're better structured." I smiled thinly. "Structure's fine. But a real voice stays longer." She looked past me. "Maybe. But he sleeps faster now." Faster. More efficient. More quiet. I stepped inside, toeing off my shoes, setting them neatly by the door as always. But something felt off. I turned into the living room. My knitting basket was gone. The one I kept by the couch. The one with Caleb's half-finished scarf still on the needles. In its place, a potted snake plant. Minimalist. Cold. I opened the hall closet. Empty. Garage. I stepped into the dim space, blinking against the dust-mowed air. There it was, tucked beside the garbage bin. The yarn tangled, needles bent like broken twigs. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, one hand resting on the cracked wicker rim, remembering how Caleb had chosen the forest green wool because hoop matched Grandma's eyes. Behind me, a door creaked. Footsteps on tile, then silence, they knew, and they didn't care. It started with a conversation over herbal tea. Marissa had laid out 2 mugs on the kitchen island. Hibiscus for me, green for her. No sugar, no honey. Wesley and I were talking. She began, smoothing the placemat beneath her cup, and we thought it might be time to talk about logistics. I lifted a brow. "Logistics," she offered a gentle smile. "Household contributions, future planning, that sort of thing." Across the room, Caleb was building a cardboard rocket in silence. Wesley sat at the dining table with a stack of folders, tapping away on his laptop. "I've already given you both the house," I said carefully. "That was in the will after Harold passed. It's yours." Marissa nodded too quickly. "Yes, and we're so grateful."
"Mom, truly."
Wesley chimed in without looking up. "But with the way property taxes are increasing and long-term care costs, well, we figured it's best to formalize everything now. While you're still sharp." I set my cup down. "Still?" He looked up finally. "You know what I mean." I didn't like how that felt in my chest. Marissa slid a folder across the counter toward me. Cream-colored, thick stock. "We had our family lawyer draft this," she said. "Just a small legal adjustment. Nothing major." I opened it slowly. Legalese flooded the page in dense blocks, but my eyes caught on one bold title, Revocable Living Trust Agreement. My heart paused. Marissa's voice was airy. "It's just a formality. This way, if anything happens, decisions won't be delayed." She reached over and touched my hand. "We'll want to make sure you're taken care of." "This protects you, Mom?" Wesley added. "And Caleb? And us?" "It's about alignment." Alignment. I stared at the words on the page. My name was there, but so was Wesley's. And Marissa's. Listed as trustees. Joint authority. My fingers curled around the edge of the folder. "Can I take a few days to read this over?" I asked, a pause. Wesley blinked. "Of course. We just thought since you trust us." I looked at Caleb. He was drawing planets with a crayon. Blue smudged his sleeve. I used to be the one he'd run to when lines didn't stay straight. Now I wasn't even sure which page I was on anymore. Miriam still kept her legal books in color-coded stacks. Red for estate law, green for probate, blue for things Eunice never dared ask about. The woman hadn't practiced in years, but her mind was sharp as ever. She adjusted her glasses, flipping through the trust document page by page. "This clause here," she said, tapping a paragraph midway through. "It allows them to make asset transfers without notifying you. And here, medical discretion in the event of incapacitation. That's concerning." Eunice sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair. The living room smelled of citrus and dust, like old linen drawers and freshly peeled oranges. "I didn't think it was this serious," she murmured. Miriam looked up. It's dressed up like a safety net, but it's more like a cage with silk bars. The folder felt heavier in her lap. I haven't signed anything yet, Eunice said almost defensively. Miriam softened. Good. But Eunice, do you trust them with this much power? The answer stuck somewhere behind her teeth. Later that afternoon, Eunice stopped by the credit union. She had helped open Marissa's first account there when she turned 16. A rainy Tuesday, they'd picked out the card design together, pink with white stars. The teller, a woman around her age with a kind mouth and silvering roots, hesitated when Eunice presented her ID and paperwork. I'm sorry, Ma. Without being listed on the account. I'm her mother, Eunice said, gently but firmly. She passed 2 weeks ago. I'm not asking for access. I need to see activity. The woman hesitated again, then nodded, typing softly. A printer hummed to life. She handed Eunice a single sheet. One transaction. That's all I can give you? Eunice unfolded it slowly. A wire transfer, $42,000, moved at 3:42 p.m. on the day Marissa died. Her throat tightened. Marissa had been in hospice, barely breathing. The timing didn't make sense. The destination was an account under the name W. Cordell Holdings. Her knees wobbled slightly. She gripped the counter. Are you all right, ma'am? The teller asked. Eunice nodded slowly.
Just tired,
She whispered. But it wasn't fatigue, it was fury, quiet and white-hot. She folded the paper, placed it in her bag, and walked out without another word. The scent of roasted garlic greeted her at the door. Eunice slipped off her shoes, careful not to scuff the baseboard. The house was warm, but something in the air felt cold. Marissa was chopping parsley at the kitchen counter, her voice light. Dinner in 15. I made your favorite, chicken marsala. Wesley sat on the sofa, scrolling through his tablet, one foot propped over the other. Caleb was nowhere in sight. Eunice nodded, setting her bag down by the coat rack. Her hands brushed the strap where the folded bank statement still rested. $42,000 gone. Transferred during her daughter's final hours, and no one had said a word. Rough day, Marissa asked, wiping her hands on a linen towel. Eunice smiled faintly. Just errands. Wesley looked up briefly. We're thinking about refinancing the upstairs unit, he said. Might add a home office. She only nodded. She watched them. Their ease. Their calm. She thought about how quickly they moved after Marissa passed. The swift cremation. The closed service. The packed boxes that were never unpacked. Just discarded or replaced. Not grief. Strategy. Dinner was silent save for forks and knives tapping against porcelain. Caleb finally bounded down the stairs halfway through, hair tousled, carrying a plush giraffe. Grandma, can we draw after this? Her throat caught. Of course, sweetheart. After the dishes were done, she joined him at the dining table. He handed her a blunt crayon and a sheet of printer paper. Let's make a planet, he grinned. One with green oceans and purple skies. She drew slowly, her lines careful. He colored with abandon, cheeks flushed. Does this planet have a name? She asked. He tapped the paper. Universe. Because it's yours. Her breath hitched. She reached over and smoothed his hair back. Then I guess it needs a moon. They worked in silence, surrounded by stars and half-broken crayons. Later, when he was tucked into bed, she returned downstairs. Wesley and Marissa were watching a true crime documentary. Something about financial fraud, how fitting. She walked past them quietly and slipped into the guest room. The one they called hers now, the one furthest from the stairs. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside was a blank notebook she had once meant to use for poetry. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. She clicked the pen open and, on the first line, wrote, 3:42 p.m. transfer to W. Cordell Holdings, 42,000 day of death. Then paused and wrote another clause 14 revocable authority without consent. She drew a small star next to it. They thought she was fading. But she was just beginning. The next morning, Eunice rose before the house stirred. She padded softly down the hallway, bypassing the creaky stair-step, and headed for the kitchen. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the windows glowed faintly blue. She brewed a cup of tea in silence. Then she watched. Marissa kept the desk drawer in the dining room locked now. It used to stick slightly. Eunice had once stored wrapping paper and ribbon inside. Now it clicked shut with finality, a new keyhole gleaming under the handle. She never saw anyone open it, but Wesley lingered nearby often, phone pressed close to his ear. Voice low, sentences clipped. Once, she caught only the tail end. Before she figures it out. He'd turned just then, smiled too quickly, and changed the subject. Later that day, she noticed the photo was missing. It had sat on the mantel for years. Eunice, Marissa, and baby Caleb under the oak tree in front of the old house. Sunlight in their hair. Marissa mid-laugh. Gone. In its place was a framed diploma, Wesley's. Eunice said nothing. At bedtime, Caleb lay curled under rocket ship sheets, flipping through a book she didn't recognize. Something about behavioral goals for kids. I miss our book about stars, he whispered. Where is it? She asked gently. He frowned. Daddy said it was silly. Said grandma stories make people forget real things. Eunice felt something twist behind her ribs. She kissed his forehead. Stories help us remember the important things, honey. He nodded sleepily. That night, while Wesley and Marissa were out, Eunice walked past the study. The door was ajar, her eyes caught on a stack of papers beside the printer. She hesitated, then stepped inside. A utility bill, a school form, and then a document with her name at the top, authorization of durable power of attorney. Her eyes scanned it. Medical, financial, all rights transferred. Signed at the bottom, Eunice Langford. Date 2 weeks ago. She reached for the pen on the desk and held it beside the signature. Different ink, different pressure, different curve in the F. Her breath caught. She never signed this. Her chest pulsed, not with panic, but with precision. She folded the paper and slid it into her coat pocket, heart drumming steady. They weren't just preparing for her decline. They were manufacturing it. The doorbell rang for the 4th time. Eunice wiped her hands on a dish towel and headed for the front door, careful not to trip on the floral runner Marissa had recently added. Outside stood a couple she didn't recognize, smiling mid-50s, dressed in business casual with matching wine bottles in hand. Hi, we're the Gardners, friends of Wesley's from the firm, the woman said brightly. Before Eunice could respond, Wesley called from the living room, "Come on in, folks!" The entryway flooded with chatter. Coats piled quickly on the bench. Someone handed Eunice a tray of cupcakes without asking. Another waved an empty glass toward the kitchen. No one said hello. She made her way through the house like a shadow, weaving between conversations, balancing trays, adjusting pillows. "Would you mind putting the sangria in that glass pitcher?" Marissa asked, barely looking up from a charcuterie board she was arranging. "Oh, and can you make a kid-friendly version too? Caleb's friends are coming?" Eunice nodded and moved toward the kitchen. She didn't remember offering to host, but apparently, she had volunteered by existing. The house buzzed, louder footsteps, clinking glass. At one point, she overheard someone ask where the bathroom was. "She'll know," another voice said. "The housekeeper?" Her spine stiffened, but she let it slide. In the kitchen, she poured juice and floated orange slices on top. Wesley breezed in, grabbing ice. "Thanks for keeping things flowing," he said. "Mom always said you were the organized type." "Your mom?" she asked, blinking. He grinned, oblivious. "You know what I mean?" She didn't. "Not anymore." An hour later, while refilling glasses near the patio door, a woman in pearls leaned toward her and whispered, "You must be Wesley's mother." "He's doing so well." Eunice froze. But the woman had already turned away. She stood there, holding a sweating glass, ice cubes melting into a ring on her palm. No one corrected the mistake. She wasn't introduced, not once. Her name apparently had expired. She walked back into the kitchen, picked up the tray of tiny ham sandwiches and made her way through the room again. Caleb waved. She smiled. At least one soul still saw her. Near the fireplace, Wesley was deep in conversation with a man in a navy blazer. "Been talking to a broker. The trust gives us more flexibility now." Her hand tightened on the tray. "Not if, now." She turned sharply, bumping into a stool. The tray wobbled. Tiny sandwiches slid. Then the whole thing tipped, crashing to the hardwood floor. Silence rippled. Heads turned. Wesley glanced over his shoulder. Marissa winced. Someone chuckled under their breath. Then everyone turned back to their drinks. The mustard lay smeared across the floor like a wound. Eunice knelt quietly, paper towels in hand, scooping bits of ham and soggy bread into a trash bowl. Her knees ached, but no one offered help. No one asked if she was okay. They just moved around her. Above her, the hum of casual conversation resumed. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone turned up the music. She finished cleaning, stood slowly, and placed the empty tray in the sink. Her fingers trembled, not from exertion, but from restraint. She walked upstairs without a word. In the guest room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floral print on the wall. It was crooked. Slightly. Just enough to bother her. She reached out to fix it, then stopped. Let it be off. Let it all be off. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time blurred when no one was waiting on you. A soft knock tapped at the door. Caleb peeked in, still wearing his rocket socks and holding a plush dinosaur. Grandma? She wiped her face quickly, though no tears had fallen. Yet. Yes, sweetheart. He walked in, head tilted. Why didn't you tell a story? She blinked. A story? Everyone's talking downstairs, but no one asked you to tell one. You always do stories. His eyes were so round, so unspoiled. I guess they didn't want one tonight, she said gently. He came closer and wrapped his arms around her waist. I wanted one. That's when it cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a soft fracture inside her chest. Like thin ice under weight. She kissed the top of his head. Maybe tomorrow, okay? He nodded, squeezed her, then tiptoed out, closing the door behind him. Eunice sat there for a moment, arms still folded as if he were still in them. Then she reached under the bed and pulled out the old keepsake box. It was taped on one corner, the lid worn thin. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were scraps of a life she thought would never be erased, a hospital bracelet with Marissa's birth date, a napkin with her first crayon doodle, a dried flower from her college graduation, and a letter, folded neatly, cream paper, ink slightly smudged. To Marissa, for when you need reminding. Eunice unfolded it slowly, the corners soft from time. Dear heart, if the world ever makes you feel small, remember, you came from a woman who has stood through storms. You are not fragile. You are fire in velvet skin. You are loved, even if I am not near enough to say it every day. I trust the woman you're becoming. I trust the fight in you. Just promise you won't let anyone quiet your voice. Because I never will. She read the last line twice. Then her shoulders shook. And this time she didn't stop the tears. Eunice waited until the house was empty. Wesley had taken Caleb to soccer. Marissa was out running errands. Likely together. Likely planned. She opened the storage ottoman in the guest room, where Marissa had once tucked away board games and backup Lennons. Now it held folders. Old taxes, insurance statements, unsorted mail with curling corners. She sat on the floor and started sifting. At first it was mindless, dates and numbers blurring together. Then something caught her eye. A bank envelope, creased, yellowing slightly. Postmarked 11 months ago. She pulled out the contents slowly. It was a confirmation notice. New joint account open, names Marissa Langford and Wesley Cordell, date October 14, 2022. Eunice's brow furrowed. That was 3 months before Marissa was diagnosed. Nearly a year before she passed. Why would they open a new joint account then? And why hadn't Marissa mentioned it? She checked the account number. It didn't match the one listed in the statement she'd received from the credit union last week. A second account, hidden. The air around her felt colder. She folded the paper, tucked it into her purse, and made a quiet decision. By noon she stood at the bank again. Same building, same carpet, same faint smell of toner and burnt coffee. A different teller greeted her this time. Young, neat ponytail, name tag read Elena. Eunice cleared her throat. I'd like to ask about a joint account. Opened last October. Under the names Marissa Langford and Wesley Cordell. Elena hesitated, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Are you listed on the account? No. But I'm her mother. She's deceased. I have a copy of the death certificate and the trust file if needed. I'm not asking for access. Just confirmation. There was a pause. Then Elena nodded slowly. 1 moment, ma'am. She tapped for longer than expected. Her brows lifted once, just slightly. Then she stood and disappeared into the back. Eunice waited. She could feel her pulse in her teeth. Elena returned 5 minutes later with a polite smile and a printed slip of paper. Just a basic transaction list from the public-facing activity. Unfortunately, I can't show you full details without estate authorization, she said softly. But here's what I can give. She slid the paper across the desk. Then, almost as an afterthought, placed a small yellow sticky note beneath it. The handwriting was careful, sharp. Check October 14, 2022. Their eyes met briefly. Eunice said nothing. She folded the paper, placed it gently into her purse, and stood. Outside, the autumn wind pulled at her coat. She gripped the strap of her bag like a lifeline. October 14 wasn't just the date of the account's opening. It was also the day Marissa canceled their annual mother-daughter trip to Portland. Claimed work. Said she couldn't get away. But what if she hadn't been the one who canceled? The box of old planners sat under her bed. Eunice hadn't opened them in years. Each one was filled with grocery lists, dog-eared recipes, and notes written in Marissa's looping cursive. Birthday reminders, dinner menus, favorite poems copied word for word. She pulled out the 2022 edition, a navy leather-bound one with a fraying spine. She flipped to October. There it was. A circle around the 14th? Mom? Confirm flight time by 2 p.m. Pack gloves. She remembered now. They had planned to meet in Portland that weekend, just like they always did before the first frost, an annual trip for used bookstores and cinnamon donuts by the river. But Marissa had canceled that year, a sudden work thing, she said. No details, no makeup date. Now that memory sat differently. Eunice dug deeper into emails, texts. The last message from Marissa about the trip was unusually short. Can't make it? Sorry. Next time, love you? No emojis? No inside jokes? Just distance? Her eyes returned to the journal entry. The handwriting looked like Marissa's, but it wasn't exactly right. The loops in the G's were tighter. The M at the start of her name was flatter, missing its usual flourish. She turned to earlier pages. In July, the notes were vibrant. Marissa had doodled sunflowers beside her grocery lists, hearts near Caleb's name, a mess of arrows between, call Mum, and order more tea. By October, the page felt cold, too neat, too controlled, too someone else. Eunice's stomach dropped. She placed the planner on the table and sat still for a long moment. Then she got up, took the page to the local copy shop, and made 3 duplicates. Later that evening, she sealed one into an envelope and addressed it to her old colleague, Henry Lamar, a retired forensic handwriting analyst. They had worked together decades ago when she managed records at the school district. Henry had always said, "No 2 hands write the same under stress." Eunice included a note, "Henry, I need your eyes. Compare this page to the sample on the back. Tell me if it's her." She added a sample of Marissa's handwriting from a birthday card dated 2 years prior. She mailed the package first thing the next morning. 3 days passed. Then a small, crisp envelope arrived in her mailbox. Her fingers hesitated on the flap. Inside was a single page. Henry's handwriting was unmistakable. Preliminary review suggests, not the same handwriting. Her chest tightened. Underneath he had written, likely forged. Strong inconsistencies in slant, loop height, and entry stroke. And at the bottom, circled in blue ink, "Do you need help?" Eunice folded the letter carefully. No panic, just clarity. They were rewriting her daughter. The ceiling fan spun in slow, uneven circles. Eunice lay awake, eyes wide, blankets bunched at her feet. It was the 3rd night in a row she hadn't slept more than a few hours. She'd tried tea, lavender, even that soft meditation playlist Marissa used to play during finals. Nothing worked. Her thoughts refused to quiet. She kept hearing Henry's voice in her mind. Not the same handwriting. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines. A branch scraped the window every few seconds like a clock ticking down. At 3:11 a.m., she sat up. Her hands ached as they pulled her robe tighter. She walked to the desk, turned on the reading lamp, and pulled the notebook closer. October 14, forged. Bank transfer. Canceled trip. One question looped in her mind. What if she tried to tell me? Her eyes landed on the framed photo of Marissa at graduation. Sun in her eyes, tassel blowing sideways. Eunice whispered into the quiet. "Did you try, baby? Did I miss it?" She suddenly remembered something, small, buried under grief, a call. The week before Marissa's hospice move. It had come late. 10:48 p.m., Marissa had whispered, "Mom, I need to ask you something." Then silence. Then Wesley's voice in the background. And then, "Sorry, bad timing. I'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. Eunice's breath grew shallow. She opened her laptop. It took a few tries to remember the password she used when Marissa was in high school. Wolf 1985 Virginia Wolf. The year Marissa had chosen Mrs. Dalloway for her final project. Eunice typed slowly. The screen blinked. Logged in, her heart hammered in her chest. The inbox was mostly newsletters, real estate alerts, baby product spam. But one email stood out. Unread. Sent from Marissa's private account to a second backup inbox. Subject line, dated October 16, 2022. 2 days after the new account had been opened. Eunice hovered over it. Her hand trembled. Then she clicked. The email opened with no greeting. Just words, rushed, uneven, like someone writing in the dark. "I don't know if you'll see this. I don't know if I'll have time to send more. But I need out." Eunice's mouth went dry. "They're watching everything now? I know how that sounds. But I can't prove anything yet. Every time I ask about our finances, Wesley says I'm exhausted or not in the headspace. I found a statement last week, an account I didn't know existed. When I asked, he said it was joint planning. But the name on the wire wasn't mine, it was his. Sole beneficiary." Eunice's hand clutched the edge of the table. "He wants me to sign things I don't understand. He says it's just streamlining. I don't think that's true. I feel erased. I haven't told him I'm writing this. I've hidden it in a draft folder under recipes. If you ever get this, look into October 14. Something happened that day. I just don't know what yet. And Mom, if anything happens to me, don't let them say I agreed to this. The message ended there. No signature.
No love you, just finality.
Eunice sat back, her breath shallow. The pain in her chest was sharp, not fear, not grief, resolve. She scanned the email again, then noticed the paperclip icon. An attachment. She clicked. A grainy photo appeared, slightly tilted. Taken in a rush, it showed a dining room table not theirs. Somewhere else, scattered across the surface were pages, a pen, a thick manila folder. And in the bottom right corner, Wesley. His profile, his hand mid-gesture, holding the folder. His mouth was open mid-sentence. Even in the poor resolution, his posture was unmistakable. Assertive, leaning in, pressing. Eunice stared at the image for a long time. Then she clicked print. The printer hummed, quiet and obedient. She folded the pages, email and photo, and tucked them into her personal planner beneath the flat-marked receipts. Not a word to anyone. Not yet! But now she had proof that Marissa had seen it coming, and she would make sure the truth didn't die with her daughter. Eunice arrived at the bank just after it opened. The morning air was sharp, but her breath was steady. She wore her navy coat and carried a tote with a single folder inside. No fuss, no hesitation. The teller was new, young, polite, unaware of any shared last names or whispered connections. "I'd like to open a new personal account," Eunice said. The woman smiled. "Of course. Do you have identification?" Eunice slid her driver's license across the counter. 20 minutes later, she walked out with a temporary card, a printed routing number, and a quiet sense of satisfaction blooming in her chest. Step 1. At home, she made herself chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table with the sunlight warming her shoulders. Marissa's email, printed and folded, rested beside her cup. The photo, that damning image. She had memorized Wesley's posture, the lean, the pressure in his stance. She opened her planner and began writing down a list. Account still in my name, Charles Schwab IRL Harper Municipal Bonds. The old annuity she would move each, one by one. Slowly enough not to rattle suspicion. Quickly enough to matter. That afternoon, she took a walk with Caleb to the library. She returned alone, and stopped 2 blocks before the house, pulled out her phone, dialed Miriam. The call rang twice. "Eunice? I'm ready," she said. "For what?" She didn't pause. To change the trust. Completely? There was silence. Then Miriam's voice, low, firm. "Come to the diner. Bring everything." 30 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth under a faded Route 66 sign. The server brought 2 coffees and left them alone. Eunice slid the folder across the table. Miriam opened it without a word. The email. The forged signature. Henry's note, she read slowly. Eyes narrowing. When she finally looked up, her face was different. No longer the friend. The lawyer had returned. "Okay," Miriam said. "We do this quietly. You don't confront them."
Not yet?
"I won't." "One, move your assets first, amend the trust second. You'll need a notary. I'll handle the filings." Eunice nodded, folding her napkin tightly. "What about the forged power of attorney?" she asked. "We keep it, and we log it." She leaned in. "When the time comes, we use it." Eunice stared into her coffee, her reflection rippling in the surface. "They think I'm slow," she whispered. Miriam smiled, not kindly. "Then let's give them the ending they deserve." Eunice spent Sunday morning sorting mail no one had touched in years. The upstairs closet still held boxes from her and Harold's old P.O. box, back when checks were handwritten and investment reports came in triplicate. She sifted through the stack slowly. Coupons, expired policies, a letter from 2016 reminding her about a maturing account she'd nearly forgotten. Then she saw it. Harper Reserve Income Fund dormant account notification. Her heart skipped. The envelope was unopened. She slid a nail under the flap and unfolded the page. The account hadn't been touched in 5 years. Estimated balance at $88,400. Still active, still under her name. Still untouched by Wesley, not for long. She picked up her phone and called the number listed at the bottom. After confirming her ID, she requested immediate reactivation. Under new login credentials. New mailing address. No authorized users. It took 12 minutes. By the end, the Harper Fund was secure again. Liquid and retrievable. Step 3 complete. She added it to her list, next to the others already shifted. Later that afternoon, Miriam emailed a draft of the revised trust. All assets held in Eunice's name. All decisions reverting to her sole control. No shared power. No secondary trustees. A firewall against manipulation. Eunice printed it, read it slowly, and marked the line she loved most. This trust supersedes and nullifies any prior instruments or agreements. She would sign it tomorrow. After dinner, She returned to her room with a stack of old letters and her worn copy of Neruda. Outside, Wesley was in the garage rearranging golf clubs. Marissa was folding laundry, humming tunelessly. No one asked where Eunice had been all day. No one noticed the soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. At exactly 6:42 p.m., Eunice clicked one final button on her laptop. Revoke shared access. 2 seconds later, Wesley's phone buzzed in the garage. Alert, access rights removed. Eunice Langford, living trust. He stared at the screen, confused. Then again and again. Meanwhile, upstairs, Eunice sat in her reading chair, legs crossed at the ankle, thumbing through a dog-eared page of Neruda. She read it aloud, voice soft. They can cut all the flowers, but they cannot stop the spring from coming. Eunice arrived at the notary's office 15 minutes early. The receptionist offered her coffee. She declined. Her hands were already steady. Miriam was waiting in a crisp gray suit, reading over the revised trust one final time. "Once we sign this, it's live," she said. "I know." Miriam handed her a blue pen, official, thick-barreled. Eunice signed with slow precision. No rush, no tremble. Each letter of her name landed like a stake in the ground. The notary stamped the page, sealing the moment. It was done. They walked outside together. The sky was overcast, but Eunice felt light. "We'll file it today," Miriam said. "The previous version is now null." Eunice nodded. "Then let the new story begin." Later that morning, while Wesley was at his desk with a coffee in hand, he opened the family finance dashboard on his tablet. Routine, a quick glance. He refreshed the screen, then again. And again. Where the trust account once sat, access denied. Where the bond portfolio once listed his name, now listed, primary owner Eunice Langford. His cursor hovered, he clicked deeper. All rotting authorities were gone. No co-signing, no secondary power. "Just her." He sat back in the chair, blinking, then leaned forward again, opening their shared estate summary file. A red banner across the top. Document expired. See updated version filed to today's date. He stood, knocked over the coffee without noticing. The file showed a newly registered legal amendment. Prepared by Miriam S. Lyle, attorney of record. Filed 9:43 a.m. He scrolled to the trustee section. His name was gone. Gone, he grabbed his phone, thumbs flying. But the screen froze. Access revoked. He stared at it, motionless. Upstairs, Eunice sat in her window chair watching the clouds. She poured herself a second cup of tea, took a bite of lemon shortbread, and opened her crossword. Downstairs, Wesley finally spoke, low and sharp. "What the hell just happened?" Wesley stormed up the stairs with the speed of someone used to being in control. Eunice didn't flinch. She was folding laundry, each towel aligned with care. Pale blue cream, pale blue cream. He stopped in the doorway. "What did you do?" She glanced up. "I pressed the steam setting. It helps soften the edges. Don't play coy." She set the towel down. "I updated my estate documents. Legally. With my lawyer in accordance with state law." His face reddened. "You revoked everything? Without telling us?" She raised an eyebrow. "You mean without asking your permission?" He stepped inside the room, lowering his voice. "You blindsided us. You forged my signature." The words hung between them. He blinked. "I saw it, Wesley. The document. The stroke pattern." Henry confirmed it. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Downstairs, Marissa called up. "Everything okay?" Wesley forced a smile into his voice. "All good. Just chatting." Eunice resumed folding. The fabric calmed her hands. "You should be careful," he said. "This kind of upheaval, it's not good for someone your age." She met his eyes. "And yet, here I am. Upright, lucid, signing my name with my own hand." He opened his mouth again, but a chime interrupted them. His phone. New email. Subject estate revision summary, confirmed filed. He turned his back to her and opened it. Inside was a memo from Miriam's office. Bullet points, legal confirmation, filing number, county stamp, and in bold, current power of attorney, revoked. Effective immediately. Wesley stared at it for a full 30 seconds. His jaw clenched. He slowly turned back to Eunice. She was adjusting the towels on the bed, aligning them corner to corner. "I tried to be generous," she said, not looking up. "I wanted to believe you loved her more than her bank accounts." He didn't respond. She finished folding the last towel and walked past him, calm and upright. "Lunch is in the fridge," she said. "I'm not hungry." And she left him there, facing the pale blue towels, the revoked future, and the hollow echo of his own schemes unraveling. Eunice shut the bedroom door behind her and turned the lock. It clicked softly, barely louder than her breath. Outside, the hallway was still. She crossed the room, knelt by the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, and lifted the lid. The folder was right where she left it. Under Marissa's college sweater and a pressed envelope labeled Caleb's birth. She carried it to the desk, sat down, and opened her phone's voice recorder. A quiet tone marked the start. She let the silence breathe for a moment before speaking. "My name is Eunice Langford. I'm recording this for clarity, in case it's ever questioned how my decisions came to be." Her voice was steady. She continued, "For the record, I am of sound mind. As of today, I've lawfully revoked all previous estate assignments, including any power of attorney involving Wesley Cordell." She picked up the forged document and held it in her lap. "This signature is not mine. It was never mine." She paused to inhale. "This isn't about revenge. It's about correcting a story before someone else finishes writing it for me." She added details, dates, names, the photo, the bank folder, every dot she had connected, every memory Marissa had left behind. She described the phone call Marissa never finished, the canceled trip, the shift in Wesley's tone after the diagnosis. Then she spoke of love, how it went quiet too easily, how silence is what predators count on. She spoke for 11 minutes. When she stopped, her hands were shaking, but not from fear. The room was still warm with light. Afternoon shadows softened the corners. She tapped save. Named the file Legacy Truth EL. Her phone buzzed, one message. "Miriam, Wesley just called. He knows." "Be careful." Eunice stared at the words for a long time. Then she turned off the lamp, folded the documents back into the folder, slipped it beneath the cedar chest again. And before she lay down, she turned the lock once more. This time it echoed louder. The first crash came around 7:20, a cabinet door slammed, followed by muffled voices. Sharp, fast, barely human. Eunice closed her book. She had expected this. Not the moment, exactly, but the unraveling. The truth always made noise on its way out. She moved to the window, listening. Marissa's voice was pleading. Wesley's was clipped. Then, "You didn't tell me she filed it." "I didn't know. You said everything was handled. She just cut me out like I'm some stranger." "You are." That last word was a knife. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Then silence. A few moments later, soft knocking. Eunice opened the door to find Caleb standing there in socks and Star Wars pajamas, thumb pressed to his bottom lip. "Can I stay here a minute?" She nodded and stepped aside. He climbed onto her bed without waiting and curled into her side like he had when he was 3. She smoothed his hair back. His breath was warm against her shoulder. "Why are they yelling?" "They're confused," she whispered. "Is it your fault?" Eunice paused. "I don't think fault is the word." "What's the word then?" She thought for a moment. "Change," she said. "Sometimes people yell when the truth starts to change things." He was quiet, absorbing. "Am I gonna have to leave?" "No," she said, kissing the crown of his head. "Nothing that's real can be taken from you." They sat in silence, just the tick of the clock and the breath of the curtains moving slightly from the cracked window. Eventually, he drifted into a soft doze. Eunice stayed still, eyes closed, hand resting gently on his back. Then, a floorboard creaked. She looked up. Marissa stood in the doorway, hair undone, face pale, eyes red, not from tears, but from everything trying not to fall apart. Her voice barely reached the room. "Did you do this?" Eunice met her eyes and nodded just once. Marissa stepped inside the room slowly, like it might fall apart if she moved too fast. Caleb stirred but didn't wake. Eunice pulled the blanket higher over his small shoulders and gestured to the armchair. Marissa sat, back stiff, hands folded. They didn't speak for a while, the kind of silence only mothers and daughters can survive. "I don't understand," Marissa finally whispered. Eunice nodded. "That's okay." "Why now?" "Because it was already too late." Marissa blinked, caught off guard. Eunice looked at her, not angry, not bitter, just tired of pretending. "I let it go on too long," she said. "I let things slide I never should have. I told myself you were happy. That maybe I was just old. Or overthinking. You weren't."
I know that now.
Marissa's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. "I didn't know about the trust," she said. "Not fully. Wesley handled most of it. I thought," she trailed off. "You trusted him. I thought I was supposed to." Eunice stood and crossed to the desk. She opened the drawer and took out the envelope she'd placed there the night before. She handed it to her daughter. Marissa looked at it like it might bite. "What is it?" "Your words," Eunice said softly. "From last year." Marissa hesitated, then slowly unfolded the email and the printed photo. Her eyes scanned the page, twice, 3 times. Then she looked up, voice shaking. "I don't remember writing this." Her fingers gripped the page harder. But that's my address, my draft folder. And I use that subject line when I'm overwhelmed. Eunice sat beside her. Something in you tried to speak. Marissa's lips trembled. I thought I was just tired. He told me I was exhausted. That I mixed things up. Eunice touched her hand gently. You weren't confused? I don't know what's real anymore. This is. She tapped the paper. This moment. This room, your son asleep beside us, me. Still here. Marissa stared down at the letter again, as if looking for the version of herself that wrote it. And in the quiet, something inside her cracked. Not loud. Not sudden. Just enough. The wind off the Oregon coast smelled like cedar and salt. Eunice opened the windows each morning to let it in. She liked how it filled the little cottage, lifting curtains, cooling tea, reminding her the world kept breathing. It had been a year since she left Kansas. She didn't call it running away. She called it returning to herself. Her cottage sat on a small bluff, just outside Yauchatz. One story, white shingles, a chip blue mailbox with no numbers, just a painted daffodil. Inside, everything was simple. Books stacked instead of shelved. A tea kettle that whistled slightly off-key, a rocking chair older than Caleb, and peace, the quiet kind, not silence, but peace. She wrote letters most mornings. To friends, to Miriam, to herself, always with a fountain pen, always on thick linen paper. That afternoon, she had just finished a letter to Henry when she heard footsteps on the porch. Soft knock. Then Marissa stepped inside. She looked different now. Not younger, but more present. Eyes clear, movements slower, more deliberate, and in her arms a notebook. Leather-bound, deep plum elastic straps stretched tight across the front. She placed it on the table between them. Eunice raised an eyebrow. What's this? Marissa smiled faintly. Time to write the real version. Eunice hesitated, then unfastened the strap and opened it. On the first page, in Marissa's hand, were 3 words. I remember now? She didn't speak. She just let the words sit there. Like seeds waiting for sun. They took turns with the pen. Marissa wrote first, about the duck pond near the old library, and how she used to sneak books under her coat, even after they'd already borrowed the limit. Eunice followed, remembering the way Marissa's voice had sounded at 5, reading corduroy aloud, mispronouncing, escalator, every time. They didn't speak much as they wrote, just passed the notebook back and forth like a ritual. The kettle steamed quietly in the background. Outside, Caleb ran barefoot across the patch of grass that sloped toward the bluff's edge. His laughter bounced through the open window, wind trailing it like ribbon. Marissa paused once, pen hovering. She looked up. Do you think he'll remember the hard parts? Eunice folded her hands. No, not if we give him better ones. They kept writing, 1 page at a time. They wrote about the blue wall Marissa painted at 12, the road trip to Colorado where the car broke down and they spent the night in a diner booth, the way Harold used to whistle through his teeth when he was trying not to laugh. And eventually they wrote about the darker corners too. The silence, the signatures, the moments they missed each other by inches. But there was no blame in the ink, only clarity and care. When the sun dipped low, casting gold stripes across the floor, Eunice reached for the journal one last time. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote slowly, letting the words find their shape. Some things can't be undone, but they can be told. She closed the journal gently, set it beside the tea. Outside, Caleb was chasing gulls across the shore, and for the first time in a long while, Eunice didn't feel erased. She felt written in. Sometimes, I still open that journal, not to rewrite anything, but to remember we did. We faced the silence. We gave it a name, and by telling the truth, we reclaimed what was real. Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes it comes in teacups, in letters, in the quiet choice to not disappear. I was never asking to be celebrated, only not erased. And now, I know, my daughter remembers, my grandson laughs freely, and I sleep without fear. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, if someone tried to write you out of your own story, know this, it's never too late to begin the next page, on your own terms. So now I turn to you. What would you do if someone tried to silence your story? And where are you listening from? Drop a comment below, share your city, your thoughts, or even your own memory worth keeping. Because you're not alone, and your story matters too.